teachers on campus are often wondering about having ways to streamline their teaching of writing and writing assignments. And a workshop that we held recently for about 20 people gathered people from chemistry, from English, from business, from education, from engineering, and communication studies, all to talk about how they use something called peer review in order to make the writing of their students meet their learning goals more efficiently and more successfully. So what we have on this website are 4 people who presented at that workshop, giving their examples of peer review sheets and their strategies for how it might work for you.
Elaine Shapiro from Communication Studies. If you had to describe one practice that you're especially pleased with in the way that you go about using peer review in your Communication Studies courses, what would that be?
First, I align the mode that they're going to use very closely to how I will evaluate the paper. And I use a graphic organizer rather than give a whole space for students to write long answers. It's organized as a table, and so students will address very specific things. In terms of what the students get, it helps them focus in on what is going to make the paper strong. I don't want to be the first person to look at that paper, and so I also make my students an offer that if they go through peer review and if they take their paper to the Writing Center, I will pre-grade anything. I will give them all the feedback that they want on a paper before I grade it. And so they could really they could be ensured an A because they get all the feedback they need. So, and the other thing that I do is I give them credit for being there with a paper for peer review. So there are several carrots there. 1, they can get points, and 2, they can get feedback from me before it gets graded.
Elaine, we're looking at one of the graphic organizers that you use in your course. Where do you get the ideas, or where do these words come from that we're seeing in the graphic organizer?
It comes directly from what they've been asked to do for the paper. Whatever the guidelines for the writing, whatever the rubric is, the graphic organizer is geared toward that. And I aim for open-ended questions to whatever extent possible, so that the student can't just answer, yes, it's there. Well, in some cases I do want them just to find out that it's very clear that it's there. It might be muddy, that I can't really tell if it's there or not. Or no, it's not there. And it's amazing to me sometimes that students, even though it's spelled out that they need to have these parts, sometimes it's not there. I feel bad when students lose points for something that should be obvious, but students, they can get that feedback ahead of time. And so it cuts, again, it really can help a student write well, and also what they may be interested in is get the grade that they want.
Okay. And there's really good alignment then between the way that you're assessing them and the graphic organizer prompts that they use on each other's papers for that peer review exercise.
Exactly.
I really want to emphasize in the peer review exercises that I use in my class that the students are authors that are writing for an audience that is beyond me. And one of the ways that I've helped make that happen is in addition to posing scaffolded prompts that the reviewers respond to and make sure that it's not just yearbook feedback that they're giving, great job, don't ever change. I actually ask the authors to pose questions to their readers in writing right there on the draft. I feel stuck at this point. What ideas do you have for moving forward? Or, I think this is really clear. I think this is really clever. Am I as clever as I think that I am? And then one of the prompts for responders to that paper becomes to answer the author's question. You can see some examples of those kinds of prompts that I ask authors to respond to and peer reviewers to respond to in this slide that you're looking at now.
From the 4 panelists we've heard, it sounds like it takes a substantial chunk out of class time to be able to do peer review. Would you comment on that?
That's a really important consideration, and of course there's lots of disciplines where content is king. I typically find that 20 to 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a semester is a great investment of time, because what that means is my students are getting multiple viewpoints on how to do a complex task well, lots of ways to do it right, and I also enjoy the fact that by the time the final draft comes to me, it's already been through at least 3 readers, and so I'm seeing really polished work, and I'm seeing students at the top of their game really representing knowledge in powerful ways, and so I see that as a worthwhile investment. In the workshop, we got lots of great ideas from other colleagues. Angela Hoffman in chemistry has solved that problem in a very content-heavy course by having her students, once they've gotten the feedback from one another, they put that into a letter that they write to an editor of a chemistry journal explaining how their final draft came to be. If they chose to take reviewers' advice and make some changes in their papers, they explain that and give the rationale for it. If they chose not to take that advice, they still have to state what the advice was and then represent a reputable, defensible reason for not taking that advice, which just seems like a fantastic way to keep inculcating the idea that we are professional communicators and that writing is an act of communication that happens between 2 or 3 or 4 or multiple people. Other people chimed in ways to do this outside of class and not take class time that might need to be devoted to the content, maybe in an engineering or nursing course, and various colleagues from across campus talked about ways that they have figured out how to do this online or make a peer review assignment part of a homework or part of work that is done outside of the classroom. Those all seem like really imaginative and thoughtful solutions to a very real dilemma of not enough time and so much to teach.
One strategy for peer review that I've found to be successful is to have students bring what they consider their best paragraph from their paper, and they exchange it with other students, and those students respond to it and evaluate it in conjunction with the prompts that you're looking at right now.
I use peer review in all my literature classes. For one thing, students tend to clamor for it. Those who know what peer review is, they take any opportunity that they can to use it. It also ensures that students do multiple drafts of their writing, which is a very important way of getting writers to think of their works as a process rather than a product. It also gives them a sense of what's going on within the rest of their classes, what their peers are writing about and how they're writing about it. The way I do it is devoting an entire class time for each of their 3 main papers where they bring in a full draft and they have 2 of their peers fill out worksheets having read it, and they are directive worksheets. They tell them exactly what to look for so that the students have a sense of what the higher order concerns are and don't get too sidetracked by more minor concerns. So ultimately, every student comes away with 2 bits of advice from a sample audience. Even more importantly, each student is put into the role of audience member, and they get to think about what it means to serve an audience, to address their needs, to anticipate what a reader needs. And not enough writers get that opportunity. Peer review puts them in that role. 2 lessons I've learned in doing peer review for many years is that it should be a guided peer review, that students should be given some instruction about what strong responses are and what weak responses are. Ultimately, the important thing is that the papers are not approved, but improved. And so the kind of advice should follow along that constructive criticism so that it's not, on the one hand, too harsh, but on the other hand, not too generous. we do want these papers to improve. Second is that the responders must be held accountable. So I make sure on the peer review sheet that the responders sign their names, and that I do take a look at it so that they can be thoughtful and intentional about their writing. We can't teach writing alone as teachers. It takes many, many years and many teachers. And it's good if some of those teachers are fellow students because of the nature of writing, which should be a democratic process. You are, after all, when writing, trying to communicate something to another person. Writing isn't a process of getting a grade, after all. So this is one way of using peer review to make a kind of declaration of interdependence.